What if I told you there's a place in Africa where even experienced hunters refuse to enter after sunset? A place where people lose their way, hear voices in the darkness, and where an ancient secret stayed hidden for centuries. But the most shocking part? The truth proved stranger than the legends, and what scientists discovered changed everything. Have you ever wondered why an entire forest can make thousands of people refuse to enter it after sunset? What if I told you there is a place in Africa where experienced hunters turn back before darkness falls, where strange sounds echo through the trees, where travelers lose their sense of direction, and where local communities have repeated the same warning for generations? Leave before the sun disappears. Tonight, we are traveling deep into the heart of Central Africa to uncover one of the continent's most fascinating mysteries. Is this forest truly cursed? Are the stories only legends? Or is there a real reason why so many people avoid it after dark? Stay with me until the end, because around the 15-minute mark, we'll reveal what researchers, local communities, and scientists believe is the real explanation behind these chilling stories. And before we begin, if you enjoy hidden history, real mysteries, and cinematic documentaries, make sure to like this video, subscribe to Africa Uncovered, turn on the bell icon, and share this documentary with a friend who loves discovering the world's greatest secrets. Now, let's enter one of Africa's most mysterious forests. Deep within the Congo Basin lies the second-largest rainforest on Earth. It stretches across millions of hectares, covering parts of several Central African countries. The canopy is so dense that in many places, sunlight barely reaches the ground. Scientists continue to discover new plants, insects, and animals here, and some regions remain difficult to explore even today. But while researchers admire the forest for its incredible biodiversity, many local communities speak about something else. They speak about the forest after sunset. For generations, elders have warned children not to wander into certain parts of the rainforest at night. Hunters who know every trail by heart often return home before darkness falls. Travelers passing through remote villages sometimes hear the same advice repeated again and again. If night catches you inside the forest, don't keep walking. At first, this sounds like superstition. After all, every culture has stories about dangerous places. But what makes this mystery interesting is that the fear is not limited to legends. The Congo Basin is a real wilderness filled with real dangers. Once darkness arrives, visibility drops dramatically beneath the canopy. Trails become difficult to recognize. Wildlife becomes far more active. Sounds travel strangely through the trees. Even experienced guides can become disoriented. Over time, these very real dangers mixed with local folklore, creating stories that still fascinate researchers and travelers today. One story in particular has been repeated for decades. In the late 1980s, a small research team entered a remote section of the rainforest to document wildlife and collect plant samples. They were accompanied by two local guides who had spent their entire lives in the region. The expedition began like any other scientific journey. The team photographed rare birds, recorded animal calls, and collected specimens from areas that had rarely been studied. Everything seemed normal. Then, shortly before sunset, an elderly man from the last village they passed approached the group. He looked at each member carefully and said only one sentence: "If the forest becomes silent, don't keep walking." The researchers thanked him politely and continued on their way. To them, it sounded like another old village legend. But as the afternoon faded, one of the guides kept watching the sky. He wasn't worried about rain, he was watching the sun. In this rainforest, darkness arrives much faster than many outsiders expect. The thick canopy blocks the remaining light, and within minutes, the forest can become surprisingly dark. At around 5:30 p.m., the lead scientist noticed something unusual. Their compass, which had worked perfectly all day, began giving inconsistent readings. They checked it again. Still strange. One guide immediately became nervous. He explained that magnetic minerals in the ground can sometimes interfere with compasses in certain areas. The scientists accepted the explanation and decided to rely on landmarks instead. Then, the forest changed. Birds grew quiet. Insects became louder. Somewhere in the distance, branches cracked repeatedly. The team stopped and shone flashlights toward the sound. But they saw nothing except endless trees. And then, for a few seconds, the rainforest fell completely silent. No birds, no insects, no wind. Every member of the expedition noticed it. The silence lasted only a moment, but according to later interviews, those few seconds felt much longer. One of the younger researchers laughed nervously and suggested it was probably just an animal moving nearby. Nobody answered. Even the guides remained completely still. Finally, one of them spoke quietly. "We should leave now." The scientists looked around in confusion. They couldn't see any obvious danger. No storm was coming. No predator was visible. The forest looked exactly the same. But the guides had spent their lives here, and they had learned something outsiders rarely understand. Sometimes the rainforest warns you long before you see the danger. The team packed their equipment quickly and turned back, confident they could simply follow the same trail home. They walked for 20 minutes. Then one guide stopped abruptly. In front of them stood a broken branch they had marked earlier that afternoon. The exact same branch. The exact same tree. Somehow, after walking in what they believed was a straight line, they had returned to the place where they started. No one could explain it. Standing in front of that same broken branch, the entire team fell silent. None of the researchers could understand how they had ended up in exactly the same place after walking for nearly 20 minutes. The lead scientist immediately unfolded his map and compared it with the notes they had made earlier that afternoon. According to the map, they should already be close to a small river that marked the edge of their planned route. Instead, they were surrounded by the very same trees they had left behind. The guides exchanged worried looks. One of them quietly said that getting lost inside the Congo rainforest was far more common than most outsiders realized. The dense canopy blocked the sky, making it almost impossible to navigate using the sun or stars. Every direction looked almost identical. A single wrong turn could lead someone in circles for hours without them even realizing it. Trying to stay calm, the team decided to stop for a few minutes and rethink their route. They switched on every flashlight they had. Powerful white beams cut through the darkness, but only for a short distance before the thick vegetation swallowed the light. Beyond those few meters, everything disappeared into blackness. As they stood there, listening carefully, one of the researchers noticed something strange. The rainforest sounded different. Only minutes earlier, insects had been buzzing loudly, and birds had been calling from every direction. Now, almost everything had gone quiet again. Then, a sharp knocking sound echoed through the forest. Knock. 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 3 slow, perfectly spaced knocks. Everyone turned toward the sound. One researcher suggested it might be a woodpecker. Another shook his head immediately. The guides looked even more uncomfortable than before. The sound came again. This time it seemed closer. No one could tell exactly where it was coming from, because rainforests often play tricks with sound. Thick vegetation causes echoes to bounce between trees, making distant noises seem much closer than they really are. Still, something about those knocks made everyone uneasy. One of the guides slowly switched off two of the flashlights. The lead scientist looked surprised. "Why are you turning them off?" The guide answered quietly. "Bright lights can disturb wildlife. We should stay together and avoid attracting unnecessary attention." It was a practical explanation, but the tension in his voice suggested he was thinking about something else. The team continued walking. Every step felt heavier than before. The ground was soft beneath their boots, covered with wet leaves that had been falling for decades. Giant tree roots twisted across the forest floor like natural walls. Vines hung from branches above, creating strange shapes whenever the flashlight beams passed over them. Suddenly, the youngest researcher stopped. "Wait!" He pointed his flashlight toward the mud. Fresh footprints. Large footprints. The entire team gathered around. The tracks were unlike anything they expected to find. They were much larger than a human footprint, yet they didn't immediately resemble those of any animal the researchers could identify in the darkness. The lead scientist quickly photographed every print from different angles before measuring them with a ruler from his equipment bag. One guide crouched beside the tracks for several seconds before smiling with relief. "They're old forest elephant tracks," he said. "The rain has softened the edges, making them look larger than they really are." The scientists nodded. Fear had already begun affecting how they interpreted what they were seeing. Inside an unfamiliar environment, especially at night, the human brain naturally assumes the worst. Psychologists call this threat perception. Our minds become more sensitive to anything unusual when we feel vulnerable. The expedition continued. About 30 minutes later, another strange event occurred. The youngest member of the team suddenly slowed down. He looked over his shoulder. Then he stopped completely. "I think someone just called my name." The others looked at him. "What do you mean?" "I heard it clearly. It sounded like someone whispered, 'David.'" Everyone remained silent. No one else had heard anything. One of the guides immediately walked over. Without raising his voice, he said something the researchers would never forget. "If you hear your name inside the forest, don't answer until you know exactly who's calling." The young researcher laughed nervously. He assumed the guide was repeating another local superstition. But in reality, there was also a scientific reason behind the warning. Dense rainforests distort sound in remarkable ways. Human voices can travel unexpectedly through layers of vegetation, while echoes and distant animal calls sometimes resemble speech. Under stress, the brain can even misinterpret random sounds as familiar voices, a phenomenon known as auditory pareidolia. The forest wasn't necessarily haunted, but it was capable of confusing even experienced people. The deeper they walked, the more they realized they were no longer simply exploring nature. They were entering one of the most challenging environments on Earth. And before the night was over, something would happen that none of them could explain. The researchers continued moving deeper into the rainforest, staying as close together as possible. Every flashlight beam revealed another wall of enormous trees, tangled vines, and thick undergrowth. Although they had been walking for hours, it felt as though the forest had no beginning and no end. No roads, no signs, no landmarks. Just endless wilderness. The lead scientist checked his GPS device once again. The signal was weak, constantly searching for satellites through the dense canopy above. Modern technology, which had guided them confidently throughout the day, was slowly becoming unreliable. The guides weren't surprised. They had warned the team before entering that this rainforest had a way of making people lose their sense of direction. Not because of anything supernatural, but because every part of the forest looked almost identical. Psychologists call this environmental disorientation. When the human brain cannot find clear visual landmarks, it becomes much easier to walk in circles without realizing it. The researchers continued walking. Then, something happened that immediately changed the atmosphere. David, the youngest member of the expedition, stopped walking. He looked toward the darkness on his left. His face became completely expressionless. One of the scientists asked quietly, "David, are you all right?" He didn't answer. Instead, he slowly stepped away from the group. One step, then another, almost as if someone was silently calling him. "David!" the lead scientist shouted. Still no response. Within seconds, David disappeared behind several enormous trees. The team rushed after him. Flashlights scanned every direction. "David!" Only echoes answered. The guides immediately ordered everyone to stay together. Splitting up inside a rainforest at night is one of the most dangerous mistakes any expedition can make. 5 minutes passed, then 10. There was still no sign of David. The scientists began shouting louder. Their voices disappeared into the endless forest. Just as panic started taking over, a faint voice echoed somewhere ahead. "I'm here." The entire team ran toward the sound. About 50 meters away, they found David standing completely still beside a giant tree. His breathing was heavy. His hands were shaking. His face had turned pale. The lead scientist grabbed his shoulder. "Where did you go?" David looked around nervously before answering. "I thought I was following all of you." Everyone stared at him. "I could hear footsteps in front of me. I saw flashlight beams moving through the trees, so I kept walking. But when I finally caught up, there was nobody there." The forest became silent once again. No one laughed. No one spoke. One guide quietly looked at the others and said, "This is exactly why we tell people not to travel here after dark." The scientists tried to explain what had happened. Stress, exhaustion, low visibility. All of these factors can affect human perception. When people become mentally and physically tired, the brain sometimes fills missing information with familiar patterns. In a place where every tree looks the same, every shadow moves, and every sound echoes unpredictably, it becomes surprisingly easy to believe you're following someone who isn't actually there. The expedition rested for a few minutes before continuing. Then, one researcher noticed something unusual in the distance. A tiny green light, floating between the trees. At first, everyone assumed it was another flashlight, but the light moved silently. It disappeared. Then, another green light appeared several meters away. Then another. Within seconds, half a dozen glowing lights drifted through the darkness like floating stars. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. One scientist quickly raised his camera. The moment he focused, every light vanished. Only darkness remained. The guides watched quietly. Unlike the researchers, they didn't seem surprised. One of them whispered, "The forest always looks different at night." For generations, local communities had spoken about mysterious lights appearing deep inside the rainforest after sunset. Some believed they were spirits protecting sacred places. Others believed they guided lost travelers away from danger. Modern science offers another explanation. Several species of African fireflies produce light through a natural chemical process known as bioluminescence. Certain fungi growing on decaying trees can also create an eerie green glow. When these natural lights appear through fog, moving branches, and layers of vegetation, they can seem almost impossible to explain. Sometimes, nature itself creates the world's greatest mysteries. Just as everyone began relaxing again, the lead archaeologist stopped walking. His flashlight illuminated something sticking out of the ground. It wasn't a tree. It wasn't a rock. It was perfectly straight, almost as if someone had carved it. The team carefully cleared away leaves and tangled roots. Slowly, ancient stone began to appear. Then another. Then another. Large carved blocks, hidden beneath centuries of vegetation. One scientist whispered, "This isn't natural. We found something." But none of them could have imagined what those stones were about to reveal. The researchers carefully brushed away layers of soil and tangled roots. What slowly emerged beneath the forest floor was something no one had expected to find. Massive stone blocks, arranged in straight lines, formed the outline of what appeared to be an ancient settlement. Some stones carried geometric carvings. Others showed faded symbols that had survived centuries beneath the rainforest. The lead archaeologist stood silently for a moment before saying, "This wasn't built by nature. People once lived here." Over the next several hours, the team documented everything. They photographed every carving, measured the stone structures, collected soil samples, and marked the location for future archaeological study. Although they couldn't determine the exact age of the site during the expedition, later research suggested that communities had lived in different parts of the Congo Basin for centuries, leaving behind settlements that were gradually reclaimed by the rainforest. The forest hadn't been hiding monsters. It had been hiding history. As the expedition prepared to leave, one of the scientists reflected on everything that had happened during the night. They had experienced strange sounds, confusing echoes, disappearing landmarks, glowing lights, fear, and moments of complete disorientation. At first, every event had seemed mysterious, but when examined carefully, each one had a possible explanation. The knocking sounds they heard were most likely produced by wildlife or echoes traveling through dense vegetation. The glowing lights were consistent with bioluminescent insects and fungi commonly found in tropical forests. The confusing footsteps and whispered voices could be explained by the way sound behaves inside dense rainforests, combined with stress, exhaustion, and a psychological phenomenon known as auditory pareidolia, where the brain mistakes random sounds for familiar voices. Their difficulty navigating wasn't caused by a curse. Scientific studies have shown that people often walk in circles when they lose reliable visual references. Inside a rainforest, where every direction appears identical, becoming disoriented is surprisingly common. Even the large shadow that terrified the team turned out to be a forest elephant, an elusive species known to move quietly through dense vegetation at night. So, was the forest actually cursed? There is no scientific evidence that it is, but that doesn't make the stories meaningless. Local communities have respected these forests for generations, not because they feared imaginary monsters, but because they understood how dangerous the rainforest becomes after sunset. Their warnings were practical lessons, passed from one generation to the next through powerful stories and legends. Sometimes, legends survive because they protect people. By telling children never to enter the forest after dark, elders reduce the risk of getting lost, encountering dangerous wildlife, or suffering injuries far from help. Over time, these life-saving warnings became mysterious tales that fascinated outsiders. The greatest mystery wasn't supernatural. It was the rainforest itself. The Congo Basin remains one of the wildest places on Earth. Scientists continue to discover new species, ancient archaeological sites, and evidence of civilizations that history almost forgot. Every expedition reveals something new, reminding us how little we still know about one of the planet's most extraordinary ecosystems. Perhaps the real lesson is this: not every mystery needs a supernatural explanation. Nature is already mysterious enough. The next time you hear an old legend, don't dismiss it too quickly. Behind every story may be a forgotten piece of history, a scientific mystery waiting to be solved, or a warning that once saved countless lives. So, would you enter this forest after sunset? Let us know your answer in the comments below. If you enjoyed this documentary, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the bell icon so you never miss another mystery from Africa Uncovered. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep uncovering the hidden stories the world has forgotten. This is Africa Uncovered.